second time in a row, and this golden generation has yet another trophy.
The world of football has seen some truly incredible nations pass through and dominate all those who stood in their way, from Brazil to France to Italy to Argentina. However, when you say the words international domination, the only team that most people who are still breathing today would associate with that phrase is Spain, 2008 to 2012, a 4-year period that is more or less rivaled to none in the realm of modern international football. Some of the most technically brilliant and mesmerizing football to ever be seen. Winners of the European Championship, the World Cup, and another European Championship, all in quick succession, while maintaining a record that included only 2 losses in a 57-game period. Innovators of a play style that many are still trying to replicate to this very day. A nation that knew nothing but success on both an international and a domestic level. More than one manager shaping a period of undeniable dominance, and those last 2 points show us that this was not luck. It was systematic. But how did they do it? Today, I invite you to join me in looking back at the Spanish Dynasty, a period of unrivaled success. Hello everyone, truly hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel, subscribe if you haven't. Spain has always been a country that is known to have footballing talent. The fact that the Real Madrids of the world have been the best team on the planet across numerous decades should tell you just that. At the same time, historically, the national team has mostly fallen short. Up until 2008, despite being a major footballing nation, La Roja had one major trophy to their name. It's more than most, but still, dating back as far as the 50s, this nation was widely nicknamed the Underachievers. Tournament after tournament ended in disappointment. Internal and political conflicts played a large role in making this so. But, as always, so we're all on the same page regarding the significance of their achievements, we have to take a look at the road that led to them. Spain was one of the original members of FIFA when the organization was founded all the way back in 1904. The idea was to create an umbrella organization for all national teams such that the federation could organize matches, tournaments, and more. At the time, the other nations in the federation were France, Belgium, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Switzerland. Oh, and Spain was represented by the Madrid Football Club, which is quite interesting given today's climate. Anyway, as the organization expanded, so did the representation of the Spaniards. The Royal Spanish Football Federation was created in 1913. 1920 was when the first fully fledged Spanish national team was organized, the same year as the Olympics in Belgium, a competition where Spain picked up a silver medal, which isn't too bad for their first major competitive appearance. The 1934 World Cup was up next, as they never got invited to the 1930 edition, which was the first one. And in their first match in this competition, they beat the Brazilians in the first round, but eventually fell victim to Italy in the quarterfinals. It's not a terrible result. I mean, Italy did go on to win the whole thing and become the first European world champions, but this would be the first in a long list of disappointing results at the hands of the Italians. Fun fact, Uruguay refused to travel to Italy where the tournament was held, as Italy refused to travel to Uruguay for the previous one where that tournament was held. Also, a bunch of Argentine-born players that had reached the final of the 1930 World Cup with Argentina switched nationalities to become Italian for the 1934 edition and help them win the title. I didn't realize that was an option. The home nations never participated, and there are still accusations to this very day that Benito Mussolini, a devout fascist, was influencing results of the matches in one way or another, but all of that is a story for another day. Both the Spanish Civil War and World War II put a halt on Spain's participation in the world's game, so the period between 1936 and 1950 saw no competitive international action by the Spaniards. 1950 saw a return to the World Cup, an impressive return, no less, a 4th place finish after topping their group. Outside of football though, the Great Wars may have been over, but tensions and suffering were still rife within a dictator-ruled Spain, as well as several other political situations going on across the rest of Europe. For example, in 1960, the European Championship was formed. Spain were doing pretty well up until the final 8 in the qualifying rounds. They thumped Poland 7-2 on aggregate and were drawn with the Soviet Union next. Spain, still under Francoist rule at the time, refused to travel to the Soviet Union for this match and as a result were disqualified. The Soviet Union went on to win the whole competition, and for that reason it's probably worth saying that this could have been their first major win, because 4 years later the 1964 Euros was held in Spain and they beat the Soviet Union in the final. They didn't let that home ground advantage go to waste, I see. Another fun fact, this was the formation that they used in that final. Tons of players in one area of the pitch, a precursor of things to come, probably. From what must have been the highest of highs, the national team, alongside the nation itself, fell into turbulent times. The Francoist regime was nearing the end of its life cycle in the period between about 1966 and 1975. However, this period also proved to be of such a high impact that the nation did nothing but regress in terms of football. Qualification was earned into the 1966 World Cup, but when you're drawn against both West Germany and Argentina, there are certainly more embarrassing ways to be knocked out at the group stage. The 1970 and 74 World Cup, the 68, 72 and 76 Euros, Spain qualified for none of them. To be fair, I think there were bigger things to worry about other than football. Spain returned to international football with the 1978 World Cup held in Argentina. However, it was another year that was marred with controversy. The quality of the pitches at each stadium varied tremendously, leading many to believe that the Argentines had intentionally sabotaged them where they knew their biggest threats would play. The biggest of which was Brazil, who played all of their group matches in the Estadio José María Minella in Mar del Plata. Unlucky for Spain, they were drawn in the same group as Brazil. However, they only had to play one match at the Mar del Plata stadium and it ended in a draw. In fact, Spain played 2 of their group matches in one of the best maintained pitches in the tournament, but were still knocked out in the group stages. So the tinfoil hats can be put away for the time being, but don't worry, they will be out again soon. The 1982 World Cup was held in Spain under huge expectations for the Spanish. Coach Jose Santamaria steered his boys into the second round of groups without too much fuss, but then absolutely capitulated, failing to win even a single match after. What's worse is that all matches in this group were played at the Santiago Bernabeu. 1984 was a lot more positive. Actually, it was almost a fairy tale. In the qualifiers for the 1984 Euros, when the final match day came, Spain were in a tough position. Them and the Netherlands were tied going for the qualifying slot in their group, but the Oranje had a goal difference of 10 more than them. In other words, Spain needed 11 goals in their final match versus Malta to qualify. Somehow, by the grace of the footballing gods, they scored 12 in a 12-1 win. And what made this even more crazy is that this meant that they were tied on goal difference with the Dutch. Luckily, the tiebreaker was goals scored with 24 versus 22. And that meant La Roja went through, and they almost went all the way, making it to the finals. But as with several tournaments of the past, the hosts took home the silverware. France, this time. Luis Suarez, not that one, became head coach in 1990, but was fired after being knocked out in the round of 16. By this point, I think you get the deal. Spain came into just about every tournament as one of the strongest sides. Much was expected of them, in particular from their staunch support. They even performed quite well in many of the early matches, but they ultimately failed to go past the quarterfinals, apart from that one time. Every time. Italy and France were more often than not the main culprits. 1994 World Cup quarterfinals. Spain lose to Italy by 2-1. The controversial match because Luis Enrique is elbowed by Mauro Tassotti in the box, causing visible bleeding. No penalty. Spain eliminated. 1996 Euros quarterfinals. Spain lose to England on penalties. 1998 World Cup group exit. 2000 Euros quarterfinals, France. 2002 World Cup, Quarterfinals, South Korea on penalties, possibly the match that stings the most for the Spaniards. Spain scored 2 goals that were ruled out, first to an incredibly soft foul in South Korea's box, and second, due to a ball that was deemed to have crossed the dead ball line before a cross that led to a headed goal. The overwhelming opinions were that both goals should have stood. These were just 2 decisions in a series of decisions that many point towards as proof of a rigged tournament. The Telegraph pulled no punches when describing what we all witnessed that day. Warning, do not cheer for South Korea. They have no right to be in a World Cup semi-final. Spain should be playing Germany in Seoul. The records say that the Koreans knocked out Spain in a penalty shootout in Gwangju on Saturday. The records are a lie, and this tournament has descended into farce. Yikes. Spain, like Portugal, greatly underestimated the Greeks in 2004 too. Not once, but twice. If I were to tell you that Greece and Spain were drawn in the same group for both the qualifiers and the final tournament, who would you have expected to come out above the other? If your answer was Greece both times, you'd be correct. Stylistically, when it comes to this country, there has been a distinct approach to the game, aggressive and direct. This is what has historically been associated with the Spaniards throughout everything we've spoken about so far in this video, but it hasn't always worked for one reason or another. In 2006, when Spain went into the World Cup with this playstyle, it didn't work, and Spain were knocked out in the quarterfinals, bronze. But the reason that it didn't work didn't come down to the players being incapable, far from it. The problem was that the team wasn't playing to their strengths. Ironically, strength was not one of them. The French team that knocked them out of the World Cup consisted of players such as Zinedine Zidane, Thierry Henry, Patrick Vieira, Claude Makelele, all players that have been praised for their physicality, stature, or aggression to some degree. When you go man for man against these guys, you better be ready for war. Spain, unfortunately, were not up to the task. Luis Aragonés recognized that. Aragonés, you see, is a very interesting man. By 2004, when he was given the manager job for Spain, he was a seasoned veteran. Born in 1938, he played at a high level, winning multiple La Ligas with Atletico Madrid, and he'd managed at a high level, winning multiple honors with both Barcelona and Atletico Madrid. Other Spanish teams he'd managed included Real Betis, Valencia, Mallorca, Sevilla, Real Oviedo, and many more. At 66, he knew everything that there was to know about Spanish football. Few would have been a better choice. Before the 2006 World Cup, he went to work immediately by prioritizing younger players over the likes of Raúl and Mikel Salgado, an unpopular opinion as they were fan favorites. Still, Spain failed to progress. So he looked at things differently, and it was at this point that the biggest buzzword in world football between about 2008 and 2015 really grew into prominence: Tiki-Taka. At its core, Tiki-Taka is a form of patient, possession-orientated football that relies on quick, short passing between players to tire opponents out before attacking any groups that open up and aggressively winning the ball back in defense. Opponents can't score if they don't have the ball. Am I right? This playstyle has roots that go back to the very beginning of football, 1992. Kidding, of course. Total football, a tiki-taka predecessor of sorts and variations of it, are footballing philosophies that are rooted in high possession, a high defensive line, players continuously moving, being comfortable in all areas of the pitch, and being able to conduct interplay seamlessly. As far back as the 1930s, Schalke 04 were credited with using these principles. The Hungarian national side in the 50s, the Dutch national side in the 70s, featuring Johan Cruyff as a player, and Barcelona in the early 1990s, featuring Johan Cruyff as a manager. All teams that have had success with this philosophy. The true beauty of this playstyle is that when adapted in a specific way, it rapidly decreases the number of physical 50-50s. The only problem with using this style is that it requires highly technical, agile, and fluid players to make it work effectively. Luckily for Aragonés and Spain, There was absolutely no shortage of these kinds of players, and even more so, this entire period made for what most would refer to as a perfect storm. Teaching technique and efficient passing and dribbling with a touch of flair and discipline has long been part of the foundations of the biggest clubs in Spain. Of course, we can't ignore Johan Cruyff's success and influence at Barcelona, as this played a role in emphasizing this. The result was that by late 2000, the greatest generation of Spanish footballers to ever exist had been rising rapidly and reaching maturity. Xavi Hernandez, Andres Iniesta, Xabi Alonso, David Silva, Fernando Torres, David Villa, Cesc Fabregas, Sergio Ramos, Iker Casillas. In 2006, all of these players were not only Spanish, but they were 25 and younger, with Xavi being the only exception. Coupled with Carlos Puyol, these players would form the spine of one of the greatest threats the world has ever seen. The second and third games of the Euros 2008 qualifiers were poor. Spain lost to Northern Ireland and Sweden back-to-back, not ideal in the slightest. The loss versus Ireland was 3-2 away and purely came down to defensive errors. A poor back pass, a poorly defended set piece, and a poorly implemented high line. The loss versus Sweden was 2-0 away and purely came down to 2 quick counterattacks, one of which was off a poor set piece by Spain. Both matches came in late 2006. For all of Spain's technical brilliance, there were still massive kinks to work out, one of which was aggression in winning the ball back and the discipline to track back after failed attacks. It took a bit of getting used to, but by early 2007, something clicked within and between the players at a national level. A 1-0 win versus England was all they needed to get things rolling. But winning games means nothing unless you're winning the right ones at the right times. Which brings us to the first test, the 2008 UEFA Euros, held in Austria and Switzerland. After those first 2 losses, Spain went on to claim the top spot in the group without a blip and headed into the tournament as they had done for most of the other tournaments they'd entered, as one of the favorites. They were on a 16-game unbeaten streak at this point, but at the same time, we had seen this before. Remember, great form from them was often followed by capitulation. Remember, the last and only time that they had won a major trophy was in 1964, and they'd failed to make it past the last 8 in every attempt since. Would this be their year? Absolutely. For the majority of the tournament, Spain lined up in some variation of a 4-4-2 or 4-2-2, with 2 pivots and no true wingers, but rather 2 attacking midfielders deployed in wide positions, with license to cut inside. As I mentioned before, Tiki-Taka is characterized by short passes, so being compact is key. With Silva, Iniesta, Villa, and Torres up top as the attacking 4, Marcos Senna and Xavi played the 6th role behind them. With the exception of Torres, none of these players were over 175 centimeters. But as Aragones planned for, the interplay was so fast that this did not matter. Joan Capdevila, Carlos Puyol, Sergio Ramos, Carlos Malchena, and Iker Casillas made up the back line. And the chaos created by this team was just ridiculous. The ball would always start from the back, where Xavi would progress it further. Villa would roam freely as the second striker. Iniesta and Silva would drift centrally, and with Ramos and Capdevila pushing up, opponents had to pick their battles. Defend inside or out. While they were deciding, Spain averaged 33 passes per shot in Euro 2008. The group stages weren't too difficult. Russia were blown away in this match by 4-1, 3 straight wins and through to the quarterfinals. There, they faced one of their greatest rivals, Italy. Up to this point, the two had faced one another 5 times in previous World Cups and European Championships. Spain had not won once, and Italy were the reigning world champions. This match could have gone either way as it went all the way to penalties. Casillas came in clutch with 2 saves, and Fabregas scored the decider to put them through. They faced Russia in the semis, and as they had done in the groups, dismantled them, which left Germany to tackle in the final. Germany were a monstrous team, as you can expect from the Germans. Every single player in this picture is a legend in their own right. However, the final itself was an exercise of patience for Spain, and a matter of not being direct enough for Germany. Cesc Fabregas started over David Villa and was placed as an extra man in the midfield to further emphasize control. And even though Germany had more possession and started off stronger, they never made their ascendancy count. Spain, and more specifically, Fernando Torres, did. Just before halftime, he latched onto a Xavi pass where, if we're all being honest, he started off at second best to reach the ball. Philipp Lahm should have done better here, but Torres' determination was just something else. 1-0 Spain. Germany couldn't recover, and as a result, Spain were the kings of Europe for the first time in 44 years. Xavi was named as the player of the tournament, rightly so. David Villa won the Golden Boot with 4 goals, and 9 Spanish players made the team of the tournament, and it was just the beginning. Back on a domestic level, the reasons that all of this worked were showing too. Barcelona became the golden standard for all clubs in Europe as Pep Guardiola guided them to unprecedented success. He did so using a similar playstyle as the national team, although, ironically, Guardiola has gone on record multiple times condemning the use of the words Tiki-Taka, mostly because he believes that the media turned its understanding into purely short, quick passes but never emphasized the purpose of it, distorting how people interpret the term. I loathe all that passing for the sake of it, all that Tiki-Taka. It's so much rubbish and has no purpose. You have to pass the ball with a clear intention, with the aim of making it into the opposition's goal. It's not about passing for the sake of it. Don't believe what people say. Barca didn't do tiki-taka. The truth is that it doesn't matter what people want to call it, it was working. And Pep's players were only getting better at its core concepts. The league and the Champions League were Barcelona's for the taking, and by 2010, 7 of Spain's core starters were playing for Barcelona. Of course, it wasn't a team of Barcelona players only. Ramos, Casillas, and eventually Xabi Alonso represented Real Madrid and were starters. Right back, Joan Capdevila was the only odd one out, playing for Villarreal. And yes, every player in La Roja's 2010 preferred starting lineup was playing in Spain. Although, of course, David Silva, Fernando Torres, and Cesc Fabregas were all playing their hearts out in England. Following the 2008 Euros, Vicente Del Bosque took over the national team as Luis Aragonés retired. Del Bosque is yet another highly experienced manager and former player who won everything there is to win with Real Madrid. A manager well known for his tactical flexibility and patience. The qualifiers went according to plan with a perfect record as Spain looked to do what only France and Germany had ever done: win a Euros and a World Cup back to back. These are what the setups looked like this time around. Similar to the final of the 2008 Euros, a sole striker approach was used, more midfield. And the wings were still characterized by traditionally central players for the most part. In most games, Villa played off the left so Torres could start centrally, and Iniesta or Silva started on either side. Traditional width was provided by Jesus Navas or Pedro though, 2 new additions from the previous Euros. Apart from that, the only other real changes came with Xabi Alonso becoming a starter and Sergio Busquets being selected in place of Marcos Senna. Gerard Piqué took Carlos Machena's place, but apart from that, it was mostly the same players. Spain, as you would expect, were the favorites to win the whole thing. Unfortunately, their quest started off with disaster. Defeat to Switzerland on the opening day. No team had ever lost their first match and gone on to win a World Cup. And the media did not want anybody to forget that. But after licking off their wounds, Spain didn't struggle too much to get back on track, winning their next 2 matches with ease and topping their group. Teams had realized that they were not going to go toe-to-toe against this team. It simply wasn't happening. So came the low blocks. However, this just meant that Spain had to work a little harder. 44 passes per shot in this tournament. From a look at the scorelines, it would be easy to think that Spain struggled a bit in each of the 4 knockout games that they played in this World Cup, because they never scored more than once. In reality, not much had changed in their approach. They were patient, controlled possession, and even further to their domination, they were wasteful. As I said, they scored 4 goals in the knockouts: Portugal, Paraguay, and Germany, but that was from 57 shots taken. I remember the Germany match in the semi-finals being quite eye-opening for me at the time. From what I remember watching this match, it seemed like Germany never had the ball. A replay of the 2008 Euros final and a repeat of that scoreline, but there was really only one team in this. Puyol's 73-minute winner was coming for a long time. Last up was the Netherlands. Mind you, the best Netherlands side of the past 40 years or so. Arjen Robben, Wesley Sneijder, and Robin van Persie were the spearheads. Conversely to Spain, the Netherlands had not lost one match at all and had scored almost double the goals that Spain had scored to that point. To many, they were the favorites. But to many others that knew that the Netherlands don't have the best World Cup finals record, they didn't think so. All the same, the game plan for Spain was the same. The only notable difference in their approach was that, as they had done in the semis versus Germany, Torres was on the bench, so Villa started centrally, and Pedro looked to stretch the defense. The Netherlands made no attempt to hide what their plan was: get tight and physical with them. They walked away with 28 fouls committed and 9 yellow cards. The idea made sense. And who knows, if one or two minor things went differently, this would be a completely different video. Arjen Robben missed a chance that likely still haunts him to this day. Fabregas missed a slightly similar one too, but the reason that Fabregas probably hasn't thought about this chance since is that he went on to assist the goal that made all the difference. Iniesta in the 116th minute. The most important goal in the history of the Spanish national team, scored in perhaps the most dramatic fashion. Iniesta won man of the match. David Villa won the bronze ball. Spain were literally on top of the world. But wait, there's more. We now progress to 2012. As with the leap from 2008 to 2010, not much had changed. Vicente Del Bosque was still the manager, Real Madrid and Barcelona was still the breeding grounds for the core of the squad, and each team had only grown in stature too. In my eyes, this was the greatest period in football that I've ever personally witnessed. El Clasico was marked out on everyone's calendar as soon as the fixtures became available, but it's arguable that this wasn't a good thing. More on that later. On a national team front, the only major additions to the team this time were fullbacks Alvaro Arbeloa and Jordi Alba. Ramos transitioned to centre-back following the international retirement of Carles Puyol, and it's worth noting that the addition of Alba was key. His pace on the left was huge for allowing Spain to comfortably change their approach on the fly. Qualification again went extremely smoothly, as Spain topped their group with a perfect record, scored more than double the goals that second-placed Czech Republic scored, and won almost double the points. However, come the tournament, a problem came up. David Villa was injured. His goals over the last two tournaments often proved the difference. Further to that, despite coming off a Champions League win, Fernando Torres was in the middle of a very steep decline. Spain had no firepower. Del Bosque decided that now was the time to be bold. Of course, this wasn't a complete train smash because Del Bosque still had Alvaro Negredo, Fernando Llorente, and of course Fernando Torres still at his disposal. All very capable strikers. Even still, he looked at them and said, nah, no strikers. Now, I wasn't in the room, so I don't know if he actually said that, but for the sake of the story, I'm imagining he did. Seeing the success that Guardiola had in doing so at Barcelona, he decided to go with Cesc Fabregas as a false 9 in a strikerless 4-3-3. However, in reality, this was more of a 4-6-0. 6 midfielders. I repeat, 6 midfielders. Stick to your strengths, I guess. And what was the result? More of the same. Actually, they got better at doing what they do best, 58 passes per shot this time. Spain averaged 65% possession over the tournament. They scored more goals than anybody else with 12, and they only conceded 1 goal. Funnily enough, it was against Italy in the opening match, a 1-1 draw where centre-forward Fabregas drew Spain level after Di Natale opened. Italy gave some trouble in the group by holding them to a draw, but a table-topping finish was the end result. France proved no contest in the quarterfinals. Portugal were a tough challenge that went to penalties, but after that, all that was left was Spain's old rival, Italy, the 2 winners of the previous 2 World Cups. Italy may not have had the best 2010 World Cup with a group stage exit, but they were very much improved in this Euros. And more so, these two were in the same group. the Italians were the only team that Spain had failed to beat thus far. Too bad this didn't count for much. If, by chance, you were in a coma between about 2008 and 2012 and asked me to show you one match that would best capture the essence of their gameplay, it would be this one. Spain ran riot. Passing triangles everywhere, overlapping, underlapping, up to 8 people in the midfield at times, extremely precise final balls, and above all else, 4 goals with no reply. Fun fact, at this point in the tournament, Juan Mata had not played a single minute. Del Bosque decided to give him a run-in the 86th. I doubt he will ever forget this decision because 3 minutes later, he made the game 4-0. 10 Spanish players made the team of the tournament, and Andres Iniesta was the player of the tournament. It was perfection. By late 2012, it was almost unanimous that we were all bearing witness to possibly the most dominant, continuous era of football that any national side had ever produced. Given advancements in technology, ways to analyze opposition, the fact that international tournaments only happen every 2 years, and everything in between, the fact that this dominance was able to be kept up for so long is unbelievable. Unfortunately, the party was just about over after this. 2014 World Cup, group stage elimination. 2018-2022, round of 16. 2016 Euros, round of 16. 2020 Euros, not as bad, semi-finals. However, Italy. The downfall of the Spanish football dynasty has been studied and rehashed on numerous occasions. Many reasons have been given. So, right now, in no specific order, I'm gonna list the ones that I feel are worth mentioning. The first being the death of Tiki-Taka. After many years, our opponents obviously knew how we attacked, how we moved. Look at Alves and Alba, for example. They push a lot, and some opponents would give them space down the wing, but not let them move inside. It became difficult to get in. This was Gerard Piqué speaking about how Barcelona had to adapt from this playstyle after people started to figure things out. Spain adopted this playstyle as a means to maximize their strengths in spite of their shortcomings, but they still had shortcomings, and teams found out how to exploit them. One of the main tactics was to exploit the fact that Spain weren't necessarily the most physically threatening team. This meant forcing them out wide, maintaining a compact core in defense, and never taking the bait as they passed the ball back and forth. If it comes down to protecting the box from wide areas, the vast majority of defenses had a massive leg up on the Spanish attack. Space in dangerous areas is the ultimate friend of a tiki-taka system. Remove it, and you remove its power. Now that's easier said than done, I know, but the trick was to not only get physical, but to annoy them and break their passing momentum. Try and get away with as many quote-unquote harmless, cardless fouls as possible, but still maintain discipline and take your chances whenever they come. You only need one. Basically, you have to do what the Netherlands did in the 2010 final, but be clinical. Ironically, this is how Real Madrid eventually broke Barcelona in 2012. Again, more on that in a bit. Between the 7th of February 2007 and the 7th of September 2010, Spain played 57 games and only lost twice. But those 2 losses are worth studying. The first came from an unlikely source, the United States. This was in the semi-final of the 2009 Confederations Cup. US manager Bob Bradley deployed a rigid 4-4-2 low block all game and left no space for tiki-taka. They took their time, never rushed out, and were rewarded with 2 counter-attack goals by Clint Dempsey and Josie Altidore. The second match was against Switzerland in the opening game of the 2010 World Cup. Switzerland employed the same tactics and Spain were left frustrated. As a matter of fact, Swiss manager Ottmar Hitzfeld credited the US directly with giving him the keys to defeating Spain. We saw how the Americans played against Spain with a lot of interest. The USA did not try to do everything. They accepted the fact that Spain has pace and width and simply made sure that they kept the center of defense as tight as they could. It's not a perfect system, but it was a very interesting tactic, and it worked. As teams figured this out, Spain lost their edge. But that's not to say that tiki-taka, or total football rather, and all of its variations are obsolete. Their tactics still hold true to this very day. They just required a bit of tweaking. The most obvious of these tweaks was to introduce more physicality, up the intensity and movement, invert the fullbacks to increase the midfield density, and maintain constant width. Pep Guardiola's Manchester City is probably the prime example of modern tiki-taka or total football. They still play super high-intensity metronomic football, but the team is filled with physicality. These are obviously two very different players, but look at Rodri and look at Busquets. Busquets is, in my opinion, the best defensive midfielder to ever exist, but his physicality was always the part of his game that was questioned. Rodri, however, is arguably the best player on the planet right now. He has no notable weaknesses and is the direct evolution of a Busquets type. There's actually a lot that can be said about the evolution of the game thanks to the influence of the Spanish side. But the main point of this section is to say that Spain were found out. Knowing how to beat them was never a secret, but the tactics became widespread and the period of domination came to an end. Another factor people like to mention as a reason for the downfall is the El Clasico rivalry. As I mentioned previously, between 2009 and 2013, this was intense. These were amongst the fiercest duels to ever take place in football. Pep Guardiola versus Jose Mourinho, Cristiano Ronaldo versus Lionel Messi. It was peak football, but it clearly took a toll. Captain Puyol, Xavi, Iniesta, and the rest probably weren't too fond of Ramos and Pepe trying to break Lionel Messi's legs 10 times per game. And Captain Casillas probably wasn't too chuffed when Barca players would dive, bombard the referee, or get away with certain calls. Both sides displayed levels of toxicity, and that had to have had some sort of effect on team synergy. Back in 2011, during the Supercopa de España second leg, Marcelo, Mesut Ozil, David Villa, and Jose Pinto all got red cards. Jose Mourinho poked assistant coach Tito Villanova in the eye, and all hell broke loose. Casillas is said to have called Xavi and Puyol to make peace for the sake of the national team after this whole debacle. Mourinho found out about this and dropped him from the squad for the next game for fraternizing with the enemy. Then again, from all that we've heard, it seems as though it's possible that Mourinho was never too fond of Casillas in the first place. There was a point where Mourinho believed that Casillas was leaking sensitive dressing room details to his journalist girlfriend at a time where Madrid were going through a media storm, but that only came later. The last reason that I think is worth noting for the downfall of the Spanish team is probably the most obvious. This was a golden generation, and the players got older. You see, not only were these players extraordinary, but their talents were a literal perfect fit for the setup that was chosen. Like I said earlier, a perfect storm. Spain continued to produce excellent talent and they continued to be competitive, but at the same time, something had to give. For example, Diego Costa, the leading man for Spain in 2014, was an absolute dog in his prime, seriously ferocious. But if we're being real, he cannot do what David Villa or Fernando Torres could do. It's just one example of a seriously incredible player that just didn't fit the system, unfortunately. Finally, before we wrap this one up, I feel like saying something brief about legacy. Something that I only really thought about while writing this video is that this achievement is insane and Spain have certainly cemented their legacy, but history is likely not going to look at this period of domination with the absolute bewilderment that it should, which I know is a crazy thing to say, but it's true. And the reason I say this is simple. It's because of these two aliens, Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi. Whether you like it or not, the Ballon d'Or is the biggest prize there is for an individual player. It's become something of a marker of excellence in football. I was born in the 90s, so there is no way that I was around to watch George Weah, Marco van Basten, Diego Maradona, Kevin Keegan, or Pele play live. However, when I think of the 1958 or the 1962 World Cup, my mind immediately goes Pele or Garrincha. Personalities and stories are what drive human emotion. Heck, they're what drives this channel. To this very day,
the last Spanish player to win the Ballon d'Or was Luis Suarez, not that one, in 1960. Alfredo Di Stefano won it the year before him, but to be fair, he was technically Argentine.
In the 5 ceremonies between 2008 and 2012, The only time a Spaniard even came as close as second was 2010. And the rough part about this is that it's hard to argue against these decisions because look at who we're dealing with. All the same, I personally feel Xavi and Iniesta were hard done by, especially in 2010. But this isn't the place to debate that. The comments is the place. Do it now. Spain are still a global superpower and rightly so favorites when they step to the pitch. The players of the present and the future will undoubtedly do their nation proud. But this team was special. A team like no other. A period like no other. A true showing of domination and, as things stand, the last true football dynasty. And there we have it. Let me know what you guys think about the Spanish dynasty. That's all from me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you in the next one.